Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, February 3rd. I'm your host, Amanda Borschel-Dan, here in our Jerusalem office with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. Lazar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here, as always.
And it's our first time actually here, Lazar. And on the way into the office, I saw the most beautiful rainbow, and I couldn't help but thinking, how great is Judaism that we have blessings for all sorts of different things, such as rainbows or the first time doing something in a very special way. So, Lazar, I wonder if you could help me out here and put on your chaplain's hat again and do the blessing that we recite in Judaism for something new.
Sure. So that would be the Shehechianu. And we are here in our new studio. Looks beautiful. I hope we look beautiful as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Amen. So today we're going to talk about the reopening of the Rafah crossing for pedestrians into Egypt yesterday. We will also discuss the upcoming talks in Istanbul for Iran nuclear negotiations. And we'll also hear about Lazar's interview last week with Gal Hirsch, who is the PMO, the Prime Minister's Office point person for the hostages. All of this and more when we're back.
3 million Israelis are dealing with trauma since October 7th. To help Israelis heal, Hadassah is there, with the largest rehabilitation center in Jerusalem, world-renowned medical centers, and youth villages. It's said, saving a life saves the world. Imagine helping millions. This is Hadassah, a life-changing force in Israel and the world.
And we're back. I'm Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan here in our Jerusalem office with diplomatic correspondent Lazar Berman. So, Lazar, yesterday, as we discussed on the podcast for the past week, the opening of the Rafah Border Crossing commenced for pedestrians, and we heard that there should be a quota of up to 50 people crossing. However, we did not reach that number or anywhere close to it. So please give us an update on what happened with the Rafah Border Crossing yesterday.
Yeah, so I guess you could say Shehechianu blessing, because this thing has been closed for a while. It was actually open in January 2025 as we came to that deal as Trump was coming into office, but that fell apart, of course, and it's been closed for almost a year. Now, that is the only border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. So all the other crossings have to go through Israel. It historically has been seen as the lifeline, where Gazans can go into Egypt and then from there can go out to the world. Now it's very important for Gazans to get out and get medical care in the world. Obviously, there's thousands, tens of thousands of Gazans who have been injured in the course of the 2+ year war, and there's not much they can handle in the Gazan health system. So they are trying to get out. Now, what it's supposed to be is 50 Gazans coming in from Egypt every day, going through Palestinian and European Union inspection, coming through, and then they get to Israeli-controlled territory, and they'll go through some Israeli facial recognition before they're able to move to Hamas-controlled territory. That did not happen yesterday. Yesterday was supposed to be the first day of the full opening. I spoke to an official who said there were still kinks to work out. It was 12 people each way. So coming in, there was only 12. Going out, there's supposed to be 50 patients every day, plus 2 family members each, so a total of 150, but it was just 12. So I would expect those things to get bigger and bigger as everyone figures out how this is going to work, but a very slow day yesterday, but of course, very symbolically important.
Okay, let's turn to the Iran nuclear talks. And U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is meant to be in Israel. I think even now he has reached Israel already to kind of prepare for the talks that are set for Friday in Istanbul between him and I believe the Iranian foreign minister. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So before we dive into the goal of the talks right now, I just want to get a sense of the status, essentially. They all crumbled before the June 12-day war, of course. But what is on the table exactly at this point?
That's a great question. And that is one of the subjects of the talks is going to be, what should we be talking about? Israel certainly wants, and America has said this as well, that the talk should be about all the problems that we have with Iran. So, of course, that's the nuclear file, which has been the one that has really driven Western attention to Iranian misbehavior over the past couple of decades. The ballistic missile threat, which is something that came up in the June war and that Israel has been particularly focused on, Prime Minister Netanyahu says that it is a bigger problem than Israel realized in the years preceding this, and he understands how it might even be the bigger problem right now because they could fire, barrages of thousands of missiles that we couldn't stop all of them, and that could, if it was done with enough surprise, take out Air Force runways, prevent Israel from responding, from taking them out. It's a really big problem and, of course, can hit many civilian areas. So that's a big one, too. The third one, which I cannot imagine Iran would ever agree to, is to stop their support for their armed proxy group. So we talked about Hamas. There's, of course, Hezbollah. There's the Shiite militias in Iraq, which we don't talk about a lot, but they really are a powerful force within Iraq and over into Syria. And our Houthi friends in Yemen. There's other places around the Middle East, but those are the big ones that we're talking about. I cannot imagine that Iran will want to discuss those. What Iran says, and they've said this publicly, let's talk about the Iranian file. Let's not bring in other things to make it more complicated. I really don't think there's a very high percentage of these things succeeding. And therefore, I think the chances of a military operation from the U.S. have gone way up. This is very much what Trump likes to do. He's given his threats. He's given red lines. He's given an opportunity for talks. Before the June war, there was 60 days. And when they fall apart, you can say, listen, I gave you the opportunity. I prefer the diplomatic route, but it didn't work. So now I'm going to stand by my word.
It's a little confusing to me, though, Lazar, because, of course, we're hearing the threats of armed violence or armed offensive operations against Iran from U.S. President Donald Trump. But at the same time, unless I'm mistaken, I believe that the fleet has left the position close to Israel in the Red Sea. Does that mean anything to you?
So the main fleet is the carrier group from the USS Abraham Lincoln. That is in the northern Indian Ocean. So if you look on a map, it's south of Iran. That's the main piece of firepower. There's other ships in the Red Sea. There's a few ships also in the Persian Gulf. But the main strike capability is from the USS Abraham Lincoln itself, which has F-35s on it, has F-18s, and of course it has a whole strike carrier group, has destroyers and battleships that can fire as well. That's the most important one. There's other American planes that can reach or that are stationed around the region. So there's plenty there. And it's still close enough to, if it needs to strike. Whether that is enough to do an attack that would threaten the actual survival of the regime, that's a different question. I tend to be pretty skeptical that outside military airstrikes can topple the regime. The regime has showed, for all of its inability to provide services to the people, for all the hatred that most people have for it, it is quite resilient, and it knows how to beat down and use pretty severe violence to stop protests. You saw that tens of thousands seem to have been killed. So airstrikes generally do not bring down regimes. You could look at Serbia in the 90s, where it was months of airstrikes and the threat of a ground operation. We don't have that here right now. So in terms of strikes that can bring down the regime, I don't think it would happen unless this causes the Iranian people to come back out and to really do a different type of demonstration that we haven't seen yet.
Okay, so the chessboard is essentially still set. You're saying any kind of firepower that the U.S. could be using is still available to it. And at the same time, we heard this morning, I believe, that it was the Iranian president who said that they are willing to come to the table. We were kind of waiting for that confirmation this morning. And so then you just have to wonder, is this all just some kind of diplomatic play? Is all the world a stage here? What's happening?
So everything is both sides would prefer diplomacy over war, if they can get what they want. So if Iran can get out of this cloud hanging over their head of a U.S. strike, it would love to. The thing is, how much is it willing to give up for that? We'll see. I don't think they're willing to give up that much. Obviously, the Trump administration would like to do this diplomatically. The question is, what's the minimum that Iran has to give in order to head off the strike? I would also add in there is another factor, which is America's closest Arab and Muslim allies in the region do not want war. They might not like Iran very much, but they are doing everything they can to head off war for different reasons. They just don't like stability. They don't like instability in the region, and also they might feel like they might be targets themselves. So you have Qatar. We've talked a lot about Qatar and how problematic they are. Turkey, very problematic, but very close to the Trump administration. The Saudis, Egypt, even all working with their contacts in Washington to try to push this chance at a negotiated solution. They have succeeded at least in getting the sides together, but they can only do so much. They can't really bridge the gaps in terms of the core interests and the red lines from the two sides.
Okay, you mentioned Turkey, and one final question on this. And of course, the talks are set for Istanbul. And when you heard that, did you have any kind of, I don't know if this is so good for Israel, or any kind of hesitations on that matter?
It's interesting because the past ones have been in like places like Qatar. There's not a huge difference in my mind for Israel, whether they're in Qatar or in Turkey. These are two countries. Turkey is more openly hostile to Israel, but Qatar, with its money and, of course, its ideological bent, has been doing some pretty problematic things for a while. But both countries have a range of contacts and working relationships with Israel. So it was going to be some kind of mediating country in the Middle East, whether it was going to be Qatar, Oman, or Turkey. I don't think that's really decisive.
All right, let's go to a short break.
What if prayer doesn't work? This question strikes us as a distinctly modern one, an outgrowth of the slow disenchantment of the world. But in truth, the question is an old one, and one given space to breathe here.
Welcome to Thoughts and Prayers. I'm your host, Jessica Fisher. Join me on a deep exploration of the relationship between religion and modernity through personal stories, classical texts, and conversations with leading rabbis, scholars, and educators.
You're almost not supposed to be doing this interview.
Our prayers accumulate on God's doorstep, piled outside like an unimaginably tall stack of letters. We cannot give up on the relationship because God doesn't come to the door as quickly as we may like. So let's keep knocking. Perhaps the gates of compassion will be opened.
Join us every week on Thoughts and Prayers, wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman, in our Jerusalem studio. So, Lazar, let's talk about an interview that you conducted on Friday, I believe it was, with the Prime Minister's office's point person on hostages, Gal Hirsch. And he made a lot of headlines over the weekend for some inflammatory statements, shall we say, or statements that were read by at least the Hostage Families Forum and the survivors of captivity as being really insulting in a way. And so let's start, first of all, with these statements that he made, which were so problematic to this particular population.
Yeah, so Gal Hirsch, he, since October 8th, has been the government's point man on negotiations, which means nothing existed beforehand, right? It had the Mossad had one person, let's say, the Shin Bet, the IDF did, but there wasn't someone bringing it all together. So he immediately had to create a whole apparatus to speak to the families, to decide what role the Mossad will have, the Shin Bet, the IDF, and make sure it's all working, get the people there, and to start negotiating. Okay, so we talked about all of that. But in terms, listen, this happened. It was 3 days after Ron Gvili was buried. The fact that he was willing and actually eager to do interviews so quickly after means he had something he wanted to say. So just let's understand that first of all. Question is, what did he want to say? It seemed like one of the messages he wanted to get out there was this critique of both the Biden administration and the protesters in Kaplan. It's called the Kaplan protesters, kind of as
Right. And the Biden administration, of course, in this press conference that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Gal Hirsch held, was it Tuesday night? It was prior to the funeral on Wednesday, correct?
Yeah.
And in that press conference, we discussed this last week on the podcast. All of a sudden, at the very end of the press conference, our prime minister came out with this statement alluding to not naming the Biden administration and saying that the arms embargo caused our Israeli soldiers to die in Gaza.
Yep.
So put that to the side and continue.
Right. So you could say, okay, this is one interpretation. Gal Hirsch wants to go into politics. Therefore, he wants to do things that will make Netanyahu happy. And once he saw Netanyahu push ahead with that pre-planned message at the end of that press conference I was at, he said, I want to do something similar. Called up a few journalists like myself, said, come to my office. I know it's a Friday, but I'll give you an hour. It's very generous of him. And he wanted to get this message out. So one of the message was the Biden, he told me, when the embargo, this is early 2024, this is before the Rafah operation. It was clear that Israel needs to go to Rafah. There was hostages there. That was the bulk of the remaining Hamas strength. And then you have Biden and Biden administration officials saying that they can't do it. We've warned. You had Kamala Harris, military genius, say that she famously studied the maps and there's no way that the civilians could get to safe zones. They did. But he said that he called very senior U.S. officials, had very difficult conversations with them, and said, what are you doing? You have U.S. Israeli citizen hostages, and you are making it so Hamas thinks they can play for time. So that was one criticism. The other criticism, which had more purchase in terms of the Israeli domestic political situation, was this criticism of, let's call them the Kaplan protesters, where he said that he was shocked the way Hamas propaganda messages were being taken into those crowds and then amplified by the organizers.
Let's just give a little background to our listeners. And of course, during these protests, they began as rallies to begin with after the October 7th, 2023 massacre and the Hamas onslaught on southern Israel. And they began as rallies, people gathering together in support of the hostage families and in support of trying to get them out. And of course, somewhat quickly, they turned political and they became what Lazar is calling the Kaplan protesters. And those protesters are basically anti-government, anti-Benjamin Netanyahu specifically. And so when you put that together, there was definitely a pervasive bias at these protests against the government, that the protests were still in support of the hostages and the hostage families. And so what Lazar is saying is that when Hamas or any of the other terrorist groups would deliver some kind of propaganda video showing the hostages in their terrible conditions and really heartrending but propaganda videos, these rallies would play these videos often, and so in a way play into Hamas's hands.
Yeah, until he pointed out one instance, which was in early 2025, where Ohad Ben Ami was released. He had been kept with Elchanan Buchbud, and I apologize, I forget the other guy's name. And Hamas released a video of the two of them calling for Ohad Ben Ami to go on camera and to say, make a deal and get them out. Obviously, they were reading scripted lines. And then the Hostages and Missing Families Forum made a video, and then it was played. So he was very furious about that. And then he didn't mention this, but it's something that the Bring Them Home statement was a statement or slogan that was chosen to put the pressure and the onus on Israel, bring them home, instead of on Hamas, let them go, because perhaps they decided that was the easiest way. Israeli people can have more pressure on their government and not on Hamas. One could argue about the wisdom and what that did, but his argument, which is not a crazy argument at all, is that Hamas or Sinwar, he said, Yahya Sinwar, who was the leader before he was killed, was paying very close attention to the international pressure and to the domestic pressure, and that affected his willingness to make deals. And if you look at that period between the November 2023 deal, and then we go all the way to Trump's election, and then early 2025, there was no deal made. There was Oren Setter, who was a member of the negotiating team, who said that it was Israel's fault when Israel missed two windows in March and July 2024. But Hirsch would say that no, Yahya Sinwar kept getting more and more confirmation that he could stretch these on. He says that Sinwar wanted to go 10 years and guarantee that Hamas would be protected for 10 years with these negotiations. And all these groups and countries that had an interest in getting these hostages out were actually making it harder to negotiate. It's a claim you could argue with. People are arguing it, but I think it's not a ridiculous claim. And he laid that out in the interview.
So it's such an emotionally charged claim, of course, and especially in the week when the final hostage remains come back home. And so, in light of his statements, which were made to you and the select other group of Israeli journalists, the Hostage Families Forum, or what's left of it, and many of the survivors of captivity have called for him to resign because even though the hostages are back home, he still has a role. And what's his new wrinkle in his role?
So his role right now, he said, well, first of all, is going to be continuing to take care of the hostages and the families, making sure that they're getting what they need from the government level. Um, but there are still Israelis kept in all sorts of different hostage situations around the world. If you remember, during his tenure, he worked on getting Yaakov Harari out from Venezuela a couple weeks ago. There was Elizabeth Cherkov from Iraq. There was an Arab Israeli from Jordan. I forget his name. So he says there's other Israelis kept in different places, but he can't talk about them. So he's going to continue working on that. The question I think that people are, I asked him, do you have any intentions to go into politics? He said he has no plans to. We know other people that have said no plans and then they do it. So I think that's something that we're going to keep an eye on.
All right, Lazar, very interesting. And thank you so much for being our maiden voyage. Maiden in inaugural voyage in our Jerusalem studio.
It looks beautiful. It looks wonderful. So I hope, I look forward to a lot of very interesting and informative conversations here.
Me too. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and Ari Schlacht. If you have any questions or comments about our studio or anything else, please send us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.